I think people who lead change successfully do a couple of things different than people who don't. The first is they know what they're doing. In other words, they have a process in mind for how this is going to happen. They understand before they start that there are certain things they need to do to make change successful. They don't simply say, let's make a change, and then see what happens. Mm-hmm. They know that there's a process to follow. Mm-hmm. For example, you start with clarifying the vision of what it is that you need to achieve, and you make sure that you've got support for that among people who are really important to the success of the change, even before you begin. And then you develop a process for engaging other people in the organization in understanding what it is that needs to happen in that change and what their role is in that. And also to make sure that you're listening to what they have to say about their thoughts about the change, things that they would do differently, so that they feel like not only are they heard, but they can start to influence the way this happens, which allows them to feel that they own it rather than resisting it as something that's coming from outside of them. And then as it starts to play out, as the change starts to take place, the people who are successful continue to stay close to it to understand what are some of the things that are happening that were both unexpected and different than what they expected to happen, and understanding with the help of others what to do about that. So they don't go into it and just assume it will work. They go into it with the assumption that we'll have to change something about either the destination or the way in which we're approaching it if we're going to get to where we want to ultimately go. And so I think it's that knowing that there's a process and taking time to make sure that you are prepared, that you've planned this out, that you have thought about how to go about doing it is really important. In the book, I talk about slowing down to go fast. That we think that the way to do change is to shove it down people's throats and just do it as quickly as possible. That usually results in failure. The better way to do it is to pause, reflect, what is it that we really want to do? Take the time to get people ready for the change that's going to take place. Train them in what they need to know. Engage them so that you have their input. And then monitor what happens as you start to roll it out. And following that process is much better than hoping for the best in trying to do it quickly. This is at the heart of why we don't make successful change in organizations. The world has called upon us to do things differently than we have historically in order to be successful, whether we're a non-governmental organization or a multilateral organization or a business organization. The world is saying we don't want you to keep doing business the way that you have. We need different things from you. Our response can't be to defend what we've always done as the answer to that call for action. We have to respond to that call for action if we want to be effective in our mission or be successful in business with a way of doing things that is somehow different from what we've been doing historically. Our way of doing things historically doesn't help us to respond to the new world that we're encountering. So there has to be change. And what we know through research studies that are quite comprehensive and well documented is that it's less likely for leaders on their own to radically change the way that their organization operates than it is for people from the outside or for other organizations to grow in their place who do things differently. So there are many documented examples of well-established organizations who lose their hold on leadership of their industry or their mission to others who take a very different and more radical approach to doing what the organization was doing. So we want to support organizations changing, not defending. And therefore, I think it's essential that we expose ourselves as leaders to different ways of thinking. When we listen to voices that are really different than our own, we may reject them, but they still have an impact on how we think. They will help us understand that our thinking is tied to our traditional beliefs and values and ways of doing things, that if we don't question those, we will probably remain where we are and not respond in the way we should to the changes that we're being presented with. So I believe very strongly that we need to bring in the challenge. I say in the book that we don't need to remove a leadership team from an organization in order to create true change, unless the leadership team is not willing to change. If the leadership team is not willing to change, that's the time at which you get a new CEO or a new president, because you're not seeing happen what needs to happen in terms of change. But in the case of CEOs or presidents who are open to new voices and trying new things, then there's no reason that we should remove them and put somebody new in place simply because change is difficult. We want the experience and the continuity and the knowledge of the mission and the people in the organization that comes with being a long-time leader in that organization, as long as they're open-minded. When they're not open-minded, then probably no matter how short their stay, it's too long. This is what I see happen in most organizations, that each of us, from our own perspective, our function or our geography, whatever we represent, sees opportunities to improve things. And we think it's our job as a leader to improve things. That's why we're there. And so we see this, we have our people telling us we should make this change happen. And we present that to others. If we're on the leadership team of an organization, we share our desire to improve something about our organization with others, and they endorse it and say, oh, that's a good idea, you should do that. And it happens in one meeting after another, after another, after another. But we never stop to reflect and say, how many things have we said we're actually going to do? Because we've approved each of them in a separate discussion. But we haven't stood back and said, can we really do all those things that we said we want to do? And it takes a reflection, I think, to say, oh my goodness, we've got 40 different initiatives underway. And they're all things that make sense individually, but we can't possibly do them all. So we need some way of prioritizing. We need to have a way of coming together and saying, from our shared perspective and collective interests, what are the most important things that we need to focus on as an organization? And help each other understand it's okay to focus on those things, even if it means that some things that you would like to improve in your part of the organization don't improve for now. That's the hard part, to get people to say, is it okay if I don't make improvements where people see them being needed? Yes, for now that's okay, because we're focused on these few things. And perhaps over time that will rise and become one of the most important priorities. But for now, let's not put our time and resources into that, because we have a few things that we absolutely must get done. And I think that if you can establish that kind of process in your organization, you'll be surprised at how many things on the list that you have drop off, and how much time and energy that frees up in your organization to do some things that are really important to do. Well, I think the important thing is for us to agree that this is how we're going to operate as an organization, to make it part of our culture, to say to each other, we expect this from one another. We expect not a report of our successes at our next meeting, but at our next meeting, let's each talk about something we've tried that has failed, so that we know that we're trying. And it may not be every meeting, maybe we do this on a quarterly basis, but it should be expected that every person around the table with a significant responsibility in our organization comes forward and says, with regard to our priorities, I've tried this and it hasn't worked, which has led me to think that we should try this instead, which we now put on the table for discussion, and it becomes learning for all of us, and we collectively agree on the next experiment that we should try. If we can make that part of our culture, instead of what typically happens, which each of us talks only about our successes and never talks about things that go wrong in our part of the organization, then we will have made a huge advancement in terms of our capability to learn and to change more rapidly. Because it's only through trying things that we actually do learn. And if we avoid the experiments, if we avoid the learning, we won't get any better. So that has to become a part of what we do on a regular basis.